Banker demands black woman. Move for her child, shocked when flight attendant defends her. Welcome to a journey full of drama, unexpected twists, and high-stakes confrontation at 30,000 feet. Today's story follows a confident black woman traveling with her young son, only to be challenged by an arrogant banker who insists on reshaping their seating arrangements for his own convenience. The tension mounts as their flight takes off, culminating in a sequence of surreal events that pit entitlement against dignity. But when a principled flight attendant steps in, the situation escalates into a showdown no one on board could have predicted. Sit back, fasten your seatbelts, and prepare yourself for a tale where every turn holds a surprise. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Naomi adjusted her seatbelt and offered a reassuring smile to her 6-year-old son, Timothy. She felt a gentle rush of excitement ripple through her as the plane taxied away from the gate. This was her first trip out of the country in years, a long-awaited vacation made possible after months of meticulous saving. The airline was Delta, a well-respected carrier that Naomi trusted to offer a safe journey from Atlanta to London. After all the hustle and bustle of boarding, she finally allowed herself to relax. Yet a prickle of unease disrupted her calm when she noticed the tall, impeccably dressed man sliding into the aisle seat nearby. He wore an elegant suit with a monogrammed lapel pin that read Morgan Stanley, a name Naomi recognized instantly. She couldn't place why, but his stiff posture and cold gaze gave her an unsettling feeling that this flight would be far from ordinary. A jolt of turbulence interrupted Naomi's thoughts before the flight even lifted off the ground. The cabin lights flickered, a storm looming outside the airport window. The man in the suit, Mr. Cartwright, as his boarding pass identified him, tapped his neatly polished shoe impatiently. Naomi tried to ignore him, turning her focus to Timothy as he fidgeted with the seat's touchscreen. She explained how to adjust the brightness and pick an in-flight movie, hoping to distract him from any pre-flight nerves. Just then, Mr. Cartwright cleared his throat loudly, making sure he had Naomi's attention. He leaned forward, peering down at Timothy with a disapproving glare. The look in his eyes was sharp, condescending. In that single glance, Naomi sensed a confrontation was imminent. She braced herself, determined to stand her ground, uncertain about the roller coaster of events that were about to unfold. "Excuse me," Mr. Cartwright began, his voice dripping with authority. "I believe you should move to another seat with your son. He's in my way." Naomi blinked, shocked that he would speak with such blatant entitlement. She managed a polite but firm response. "Sir, these are our assigned seats. We have every right to be here." Timothy shrank back slightly, feeling the tension in the air. Mr. Cartwright didn't flinch. He offered a smug half-smile. "I'm a platinum priority passenger," he announced, rattling off a string of loyalty tears. "I can't possibly work on my laptop with a child so close by. It's distracting and unprofessional." "You must understand." Naomi felt a flare of indignation at the dismissive tone. She gently placed her hand on Timothy's shoulder. "No, I'm afraid I don't understand. We paid for these seats. We're staying." At that very moment, the plane door sealed shut with a resounding thud, and the engines began to roar. Naomi noticed a flicker of surprise cross Mr. Cartwright's face, as if he'd never been told no in his life. Meanwhile, Timothy started to squirm, picking up on the tension. The overhead bins rattled as the aircraft readied for takeoff. "Mr. Cartwright's voice grew colder. "I have essential documents here," he hissed, lifting his sleek black briefcase onto his lap. I am reviewing crucial financial data for Morgan Stanley. I'm sure you've heard of it. Now, move." The name alone carried weight, evoking images of high-stakes mergers and major corporate acquisitions. Yet Naomi refused to give in, her resolve solid as steel. She tried to focus on her breathing, reminded herself that no seat and no passenger carried more weight than her own dignity. Before Naomi could respond, a flight attendant with a silver name badge that read Candice approached. Her curly hair was tied back in a neat bun, and she had the poised grace of someone who had seen it all. Sensing the tension, Candice asked, "Is there a problem here, Mr.?" Cartwright wasted no time, launching into his grievances. The child was too close, the mother was unsympathetic to his needs, and he was a valuable Morgan Stanley banker who needed silence and space. Naomi braced for a reprimand, fearing Candice might side with him. Instead, Candice calmly tilted her head, carefully considering the situation. "Sir," she responded, her voice neutral but unwavering, "this is a full flight, and everyone is seated according to their ticketed assignment. I'm afraid they're well within their rights to remain exactly where they are." The shock on Mr. Cartwright's face was palpable. He was not used to being denied, especially not by a flight attendant. The plane began its ascent, pressing passengers back into their seats. Timothy clung to Naomi's hand, his small fingers digging into her palm. Candice smiled reassuringly at the boy before stepping aside to buckle herself in for takeoff. While the aircraft angled skyward, Naomi felt a rush of adrenaline. She was proud of Candice for that moment of genuine support, relieved that at least one authority figure recognized her right to be there. "Mr." Cartwright seethed in silence, his knuckles whitening around the armrest. As the plane leveled, he began typing furiously on his laptop, muttering something about escalating this and repercussions. Naomi's stomach turned. She couldn't help but feel uneasy, wondering what escalating might mean in the realm of powerful bankers accustomed to having everything their way. She had no inkling that far more sinister events would soon overshadow this tense standoff. Minutes later, the seatbelt sign blinked off. Candice reappeared, this time offering a polite smile to everyone in the row. "Are you comfortable?" she asked Naomi gently, aware of the earlier confrontation. Naomi nodded, though the tightness in her chest suggested otherwise. Meanwhile, Mr. Cartwright closed his laptop with a snap and stood abruptly. Without warning, he reached overhead to press the flight attendant call button. Candice, though already there, responded automatically. "Sir?" she asked, stepping a pace closer. In a clipped tone, he demanded a complimentary upgrade. His arguments were swift and smooth, as though he had prepared them beforehand. He was a loyal customer. He was managing multi-million-dollar deals, and he deserved a private seat in business class for his important tasks. Candice stiffened. Her eyes flickered with tension as she explained that the flight was fully booked. Mr. Cartwright turned to Naomi once again with a sneer, as though all of this was somehow her fault. In the middle of the confrontation, a sudden announcement crackled through the speakers. The flight would soon encounter severe turbulence, and everyone must return to their seats. Naomi felt the plane shudder as it encountered a patch of rough air. Timothy trembled, his imagination running wild. Naomi whispered comforting words, drawing him close. Mr. Cartwright also had to return to his seat, and the irony wasn't lost on him. He ended up exactly where he didn't want to be, right beside the boy. As the turbulence intensified, Naomi caught a fleeting glimpse of genuine fear in Mr. Cartwright's eyes. The overhead compartments rattled, the drinks on the service trolley sloshed precariously. For a moment, the cabin was filled with nothing but the roar of the engines and the heavy hush of anxious passengers. In that chaos, no one could be certain what would happen next. When the turbulence finally subsided, a hush of relief spread through the cabin. Candice immediately resumed her duties, helping to calm nervous travelers. She offered Naomi and Timothy little activity kits and blankets, small comforts that warmed Naomi's heart. Mr. Cartwright, on the other hand, seemed even more agitated. He exhaled sharply, glanced at his watch, and tried again to open his laptop. But this time, a new problem emerged. His laptop battery was draining rapidly, and for some inexplicable reason, the in-seat power outlet wasn't functioning. He pressed the call button once more, demanding assistance. Another flight attendant approached, examining the outlet, but the verdict was clear. "I'm sorry, sir. It looks like this seat's power supply might be out of order." The timing was almost too perfect, and Naomi couldn't help a small, private smile. It was as if fate itself was sending a message that no one, not even a high-powered banker, could control everything. Yet the twists were far from over. Mid-flight, as meal service began, Naomi noticed Mr. Cartwright's face turn ashen. He mumbled something under his breath. She glanced in his direction, where he gripped a small pill bottle in one hand. It tumbled free and rolled under the seat with a soft clink. His expression flickered with panic. Naomi reached to retrieve the bottle. She caught a glimpse of the label before handing it back. It was medication for high blood pressure, an ironic necessity for someone who carried himself with such unyielding arrogance. As she returned the pill bottle, Naomi felt a momentary pang of compassion. But that flicker was quickly brushed aside by Mr. Cartwright's dismissive snarl. "If you and your son hadn't been here, I wouldn't have dropped it in the first place." Naomi bristled, hurt at being blamed for his mishap. Little did she know that Mr. Cartwright's nightmarish unraveling was only beginning. A few rows up, an elderly passenger suddenly called for help. She had trouble breathing, gasping for air. Panic swept the cabin. Candice dashed toward the woman, quickly assembling an oxygen tank and calling for medical professionals on board. Naomi looked on with empathy, while Timothy pressed his face to the window, trying to distract himself from the mounting tension. Two other passengers who were nurses jumped into action, checking the woman's pulse and assisting Candice. Meanwhile, Mr. Cartwright remained stone-faced. He seemed far more interested in refreshing his phone's email app, attempting to connect to the patchy in-flight Wi-Fi, than worrying about someone fighting for breath just a few feet away. His indifference sent a chill through Naomi. Some part of her wanted to confront him, to call out his apathy. But a strong intuition advised that greater troubles were on the horizon. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently. The pilot's voice crackled overhead, warning of unexpected severe weather conditions. In a heartbeat, loose items soared through the aisle. A couple of overhead bins popped open, dumping travel pillows and carry-on bags. Timothy clung to Naomi's arm, and she secured his seatbelt tighter. "Mr. Cartwright's laptop slid off his tray table, landing with a sickening crack on the floor. He reacted instantly, unbuckling himself to snatch it up, even though the seatbelt sign was on. Candice, grappling for stability in the swaying cabin, spotted him. "Sir, please remain seated," she shouted. But he ignored her, his eyes fixated on his prized possession. A second, even harsher jolt pitched the plane downward for a moment, tossing Mr. Cartwright forward onto the floor. Gasps filled the cabin. Naomi's heart thundered in her ears, half fearing the turbulence might tear the plane apart. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the turbulence abated. Passengers gradually lifted their heads, relief etched on their faces. Candice hurried to check on Mr. Cartwright, who lay sprawled in the aisle, breathing hard. Though shaken, he seemed uninjured aside from a bruised ego. Nonetheless, he lashed out. "This is unacceptable," he thundered. "I demand compensation. I'll have your jobs." He turned to Candice, jabbing an accusing finger. "You incompetent staff should have prepared for this." The entire cabin seemed to recoil from his venom. Candice's jaw tightened, but she calmly offered him a hand, helping him to his seat. Despite his ungratefulness, she treated him with professional courtesy. In that moment, Naomi felt a surge of admiration for Candice, who maintained her composure under such blatant hostility. Tension within the cabin remained thick. Candice discreetly whispered with other crew members, presumably discussing Mr. Cartwright's disruptive behavior. Naomi tried to breathe steadily, comforting Timothy and guiding him to an animated movie on the screen in front of him. She couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something else lurked beneath the surface, that Mr. Cartwright's fury, the relentless turbulence, and the rising stress levels were all coalescing into a crescendo no one could predict. Then, without warning, Mr. Cartwright's phone buzzed in his hand, the screen lighting up. He glanced at it, and his face morphed from anger to horror. Naomi glimpsed the words on his phone's banner notification: urgent fraud investigation. Her heart missed a beat as she watched the color drain from his cheeks. Mr. Cartwright's reaction to the message was immediate. He powered off his phone in a frantic hurry, shoving it into his pocket. Naomi pretended not to notice, but she couldn't ignore his trembling hands. Something was amiss, deeply amiss. The calm, collected banker was unraveling in real time. Meanwhile, Candice arrived with cups of water to help soothe frazzled passengers. Sensing the shift in Mr. Cartwright's demeanor, Candice's eyes flicked questioningly to Naomi, who could only offer a slight shrug. The pilot's voice returned over the speaker, assuring the passengers that the weather was improving. Yet even as the skies cleared, a different storm was clearly brewing within seat 22C, one that would soon spill into the aisles for everyone to witness. As the flight settled into an uneasy calm, dinner service resumed. Trays of steaming pasta or chicken were handed out, along with small salads and bread rolls. Timothy gleefully accepted his meal, hungry and momentarily unbothered by the drama. Naomi lifted the foil on her own tray, only to find Mr. Cartwright glaring at her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She wondered if he blamed her for seeing his phone notification. The moment was interrupted by the overhead announcement that the flight was cruising smoothly again. One row ahead, the elderly woman who had trouble breathing was now stable, thanks to the nurses on board. Naomi dared to hope the worst was behind them, but a gnawing dread told her otherwise. Then came a new shock. Two men, each wearing suits that identified them as air marshals, emerged from the front of the plane. Naomi had never witnessed air marshals reveal themselves mid-flight before. Their expressions were grim. They spoke quietly to Candice, who pointed discreetly toward Mr. Cartwright. At that instant, Naomi realized this was about much more than an arrogant banker causing a ruckus. Were they investigating him for something criminal? She recalled the phone message, urgent fraud investigation. Her mind raced with the possibilities. As the marshals quietly approached, Mr. Cartwright clutched his briefcase tight against his chest, his eyes flashing with panic. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. A hush spread through the cabin. Even Timothy seemed to sense the growing tension. One of the air marshals leaned down, speaking in a low, authoritative voice. "Mr. Cartwright," he said, "we need to ask you a few questions. Please remain calm." Mr. Cartwright's eyes darted from side to side like a cornered animal. Naomi braced herself for a scene. Sure enough, Mr. Cartwright leapt to his feet, his earlier bravado replaced by a wild desperation. He blurted out something incoherent about false allegations and massive mistakes. The second marshal stood by, arms crossed, prepared for anything. Candice hovered in the background, her face mirroring concern and curiosity. Several passengers craned their necks, anxious to witness whatever might happen. Naomi could feel Timothy's small hand tightening around hers. Their quiet seats, once the staging ground for petty arguments, were now the epicenter of something far more dangerous. Then, in a move that shocked everyone, Mr. Cartwright bolted toward the front of the plane, as if outrunning the entire fiasco. The marshals immediately sprang into action, rushing after him. Passengers gasped, and some screamed. Naomi instinctively shielded Timothy. as flight attendants shouted for everyone to remain seated. A chaotic chase ensued in the narrow aisle, with no place to hide. Mr. Cartwright found himself trapped near the cockpit door. He was cornered, sweat beading on his forehead. One marshal managed to grab his arm. Mr. Cartwright resisted, knocking over a service cart. Plates and glasses crashed to the floor. Candace lunged to keep them from scattering further, nearly losing her balance. The entire cabin felt suspended in a surge of adrenaline, an atmosphere taut with uncertainty. At last, the marshals overpowered Mr. Cartwright, pressing him against the compartment bulkhead. He finally went limp, breathing heavily. Passengers sat in hushed awe, stunned by the violent turn of events. Naomi couldn't tear her eyes away from the scene. Here was the same man who, barely an hour ago, had self-righteously demanded she and Timothy move seats for his comfort. Now he was being forcibly restrained in the aisle, his once immaculate suit rumpled and stained from spilled coffee. Slowly, the marshals escorted him back toward his seat. On the way, they confiscated his briefcase, cell phone, and laptop, all of which he'd tried so desperately to protect. Naomi was certain she saw genuine terror in Mr. Cartwright's eyes, as if he'd just realized his world was crumbling. The aftermath was a surreal mix of relief and tension. The pilot made a measured announcement, stating that the flight would continue to its destination and that the situation was under control. Passengers broke into subdued conversations, sharing fragmented accounts of what they'd just witnessed. Candace helped clean up the scattered debris, reassuring jittery travelers that they were safe. Naomi sat there, her heart pounding, uncertain how to explain everything to Timothy. The boy's wide-eyed curiosity was tinged with fear. She gently reminded him that he was safe. He nodded, though his gaze remained fixed on Mr. Cartwright, who was now seated between the marshals, wrists bound by plastic restraints. No one had foreseen this dark unraveling when they boarded the plane. With the tension still thick, Candace finally returned to Naomi's row, stooping low so her voice wouldn't carry. "Are you two all right?" she asked, glancing from Naomi to Timothy. Naomi nodded, though she felt a swirl of emotions: fear, relief, vindication. "We're okay, just that was intense," she answered. Candace let out a weary sigh. She apologized for the disruption and thanked Naomi for staying calm in the midst of chaos. Then, as if reading Naomi's thoughts, Candace added, "We only just learned that Mr. Cartwright is suspected in a major financial scandal." The authorities in London were already alerted. Naomi breathed a shaky laugh. It seemed almost unreal that this same man had insisted on her leaving her seat for his own convenience. The flight continued in an uneasy quiet. The marshals questioned Mr. Cartwright in hushed tones, occasionally writing notes. The tension in the cabin gradually loosened, replaced by a macabre curiosity about the banker's alleged crimes. Whispers and rumors spread. Naomi overheard a passenger mention that Morgan Stanley had uncovered fraudulent dealings associated with high-profile clients. Another passenger speculated that Mr. Cartwright had attempted to flee the country before an investigation closed in on him. Though Naomi tried to shield Timothy from these whispered theories, she found herself drawn to the drama. It was karmic in its timing. This man, who had so quickly dismissed her and her son, now faced a forced reckoning at 30,000 feet. When the in-flight lights dimmed for the overnight segment, Naomi closed her eyes, though slumber refused to come easily. Occasionally, she glanced over at Mr. Cartwright, flanked by the marshals. His posture sagged, all trace of that earlier arrogance gone. She could almost pity him, but she remembered the viciousness of his tone, the entitlement in his demands. Timothy eventually dozed off, resting his head against her arm. In the quiet gloom of the cabin, Naomi's mind wandered. She thought of the many times she had confronted bias or been told she didn't belong. If nothing else, This day served as a powerful reminder that arrogance and malice often pave their own downfall. She found a certain poetic justice in the timing of Mr. Cartwright's comeuppance. Hours later, the cabin lights flickered back on in preparation for landing. The pilot's cheerful tone returned, announcing that they were descending into London Heathrow. A collective sigh of relief passed through the aircraft. Mr. Cartwright, still tightly restrained, stared ahead with hollow eyes. Candice came by one last time, thanking each passenger for their cooperation during the unexpected ordeal. She paused at Naomi's row, offering a parting smile. "Thank you for your patience," she said quietly, placing a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder. "I'm sorry for what you went through earlier." Naomi returned the smile, grateful for Candice's unwavering fairness and calm leadership in a situation that could have spiraled completely out of control. Outside the window, London's patchwork of lights glittered, a promise of a new day. When the plane finally touched down with a jolt, an audible wave of relief and excitement rippled through the cabin. Passengers clapped, cheered, anything to release the tension that had built up over the journey. Timothy rubbed the sleep from his eyes, looking around in confusion at the sudden burst of noise. Naomi gently explained they were safe on the ground. The pilot taxied the plane to the gate, where flashing blue lights could be seen. Police vehicles waited on the tarmac, reinforcing the gravity of the situation. The seatbelt sign blinked off, and the flight attendants prepared the doors for disembarkation. But before anyone else could move, the Marshals escorted Mr. Cartwright off the plane, handing him over to law enforcement. Naomi watched in silence, Timothy peering over the seat in wonder. Outside, a crisp London morning greeted Naomi and Timothy as they stepped onto the jet bridge. Their minds still reeled from the night's whirlwind events. They followed the other passengers, each sporting varied expressions of exhaustion, curiosity, and relief. At baggage claim, Candice approached Naomi and Timothy once more. She knelt down, gave Timothy a small pair of Delta wings, an emblem that flight attendants sometimes present to younger travelers. Timothy's eyes lit up. Then Candice stood, lowering her voice. "I hope this trip will still be memorable for you both." "In a good way," she said. Naomi nodded, touched by the kindness. "Thank you for everything," she replied. Candice smiled. "My pleasure. Stay safe and enjoy your time in London." As Naomi and Timothy collected their suitcase, she couldn't help but think back on all that had transpired. An overly entitled banker, the tension, the sudden turbulence, and the shocking revelation that Mr. Cartwright was wanted for fraud. In any other circumstance, Naomi would have preferred a drama-free flight. But something about this karmic encounter seemed to complete a grander pattern. She had stood her ground when faced with unearned arrogance, and the universe itself seemed to have intervened, exposing a man's wrongdoing. Though she felt exhausted, she also felt empowered, reaffirmed in her own sense of worth. This trip, meant to be an escape from her daily grind, had transformed into a life lesson on dignity and justice. Stepping outside into the bustle of Heathrow's arrivals terminal, Naomi inhaled sharply, the cool air waking her senses. She glanced down at Timothy, who held the Delta wings proudly in his hand. "We made it, sweetie," she said, ruffling his hair. "Now, let's go see the city." Timothy beamed. As they walked toward a waiting taxi, Naomi noticed a group of police leading a sullen Mr. Cartwright away in handcuffs. His once pristine suit jacket hung awkwardly from one shoulder, and the expensive watch on his wrist seemed like an irony as glaring as a neon sign. Naomi locked eyes with him for an instant. She offered no mocking grin or gloating expression, just a calm, knowing glance. He looked away, unwilling to meet her gaze. A final wave of closure swept over her. Thus ended one of the most extraordinary flights Naomi had ever taken. She knew she would retell this story countless times, not to revel in another person's downfall, but to underscore how prejudice and entitlement can crumble under the weight of truth. As she and Timothy climbed into the taxi, she felt a mingling of triumph and relief. Though their vacation had started with turbulence, both literal and metaphorical, she sensed that a new, hopeful chapter awaited them in the vibrant streets of London. The banker had demanded she move, had belittled her in front of her child, and had even threatened to cause trouble. Yet, in the end, he found himself at the mercy of justice, thanks to the unwavering stance of a remarkable flight attendant and the unstoppable tide of truth. Naomi exhaled, finally at peace, ready to embrace the rest of her journey. Thank you for joining us on this thrilling flight. From the banker's brazen demands to the jaw-dropping turbulence, and finally to a dramatic downfall mid-air, the story reminds us that standing up for ourselves can bring unexpected vindication. When arrogance collides with destiny, truth often wins. If you found yourself on the edge of your seat, please consider liking this video and sharing it with your friends. Your support helps our channel continue bringing captivating, suspenseful stories that keep you guessing until the final word. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another gripping tale. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the unknown.